morning to everyone online, one of whom is my lovely wife. We have two sick little boys at home and sick grandparents, and I grabbed my grandmother and we got out of there as fast as we could. And Emily is bearing the brunt of sick little boys. So a lot of you are probably asking, who is Brad de Villiers, which is a fair enough question. And I was listening to an interview of Jack Hollis, the Executive Vice President of Toyota North America, and he introduced himself like this: I work for Jesus, but I get paid by Toyota. And so I thought that was a great line that I want to use more and more. I work for Jesus, and I am currently being paid by Otamatea High School to be a teacher aide. So I thought today I would share my favorite verse, a verse that has carried me through much of my life, especially since 2018 and onwards, and that I would walk you through how I've come to know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and how I'm hopefully making a difference, or how God has also made a huge difference in my life. And so we have Ephesians 3:14 to 19, which follows on really nicely from Malcolm last week as he led us into Ephesians 1. Ephesians 3:14 to 19 says this: When I think of all of this, I fall to my knees and I pray to the Father, the creator of everything in heaven and on earth. I pray that from his glorious, unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. Then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. When I don't know what to pray, when I'm meeting people for the first time, when I'm lost for words, sometimes all I can pray is that you, that we would know God's love, the width, the length, the depth, and the breadth of his love. And it is a verse that's held me through many great times and many difficult times in my life. We're currently here at CauseWay Church. We arrived 10 months ago. I think we've been to about 30 Sundays, roughly. You might recognize me and my son normally dance over there. He loves the drums. If you tell him we're going to church, the first thing he says is drums. And his favorite adult is probably Roy. Sorry to the other drummers. But most of our time is spent upstairs. Zeke is 2.5 years old. And then Charlie, you would have seen earlier in the year when we got him dedicated, who's 4 months old. Emily and I have moved up to be close to family. We've moved in with my parents, and then Grand's now come up to live with us as well. And we've made a deliberate move to slow down and to be really deliberate about how we love God, love our family, and love others. But I would like to share with you how I came to know God. So originally I'm from South Africa. Some people tell me I still have an accent. I don't think I do. I've been here since I was 10 years old. Before that, I lived in Kuwait in the Middle East for about 3 years. We moved around a lot. Dad got a lot of jobs and traveled. Nothing exciting. He was an accountant. But money is money everywhere in the world, and he seemed to get jobs all over the place. But Mum and Dad met a lot of Kiwis over in Kuwait, where we were living, and decided that they wanted to immigrate and to bring us here so that we may have a better life and a better opportunity. I've always been really looked after and loved in my home, lacking for nothing in sense of physical, emotional care, but we weren't a church-going family. I didn't have any real connection to God or know much of God growing up. We moved to New Zealand, and then 2 years later, Dad passed away. I was 13 years old. It was a Saturday morning. I've shared this story many times, but it still hits pretty deeply. Mum and my sister were out. Dad had gone for a big, long bike ride. He was a large man, and he was trying to get healthy and fit. And he went out for a big, long bike ride. I was the only one at home. Typical teenager, sleeping in, not doing much. Dad came home after his bike ride. We had an argument about me being a lazy teenager, not doing the chores. So I went up to shower, and I got out the shower, and I thought, that's strange. Dad must be watching the TV, and there's a woman crying on the TV. While I was in the shower, my dad had sat down on the couch, had a pulmonary embolism, and had died, and the woman crying was my mum. I came down the stairs, and she tried to shove me out of the door. And my Boy Scout training kicked in. I went into the room, I dragged my dad off the couch, and I started doing mouth-to-mouth and stuff, but he was gone. There was nothing I could do. At that same time, Dad passed away. It was Mum, my sister, and I. I started to get really sick. So Mum, as a single mum, had to deal with the loss of her husband and then a son who very sick. And some of you who I've got to know a little bit better know that I've had 2 hospital visits since coming to CauseWay. I'm anemic, I've needed blood. I have an ulcer, I've got Crohn's disease, so I get ulcers all through my digestive tract. And I reckon I would have gone to about 40% of high school. And the rest of the time, school holidays, getting tested, probed and prodded. It took them a while to figure out what was wrong. But part of that, and helping Mum cope with a boy that just lived on the couch eating pizza, because she would just let me eat whatever I wanted, just desperate for me to gain weight and look after herself. There was a family that my parents had met when they immigrated, the Hoopers. South African family, Christian family who homeschooled their sons who were a similar age to me. And so for a large chunk of my life, teenage life, Mum would, if I was really sick, drop me off at the Hoopers' house to hang out with them. I'd spend all week with them while Mum was working. And I knew that they were Christian. They would invite me to go to church. I sometimes went, I sometimes didn't. And yeah, to this day, they treat me like I'm a third son. They demonstrated their faith, they put it into action, and they loved me at a time where I really needed a lot of love. Their oldest son, Matthew, invited me when I was 17 to go to Parachute Music Festival in Matamata. It was the last one in Matamata, and I think Matthew's not going to see this online, but if he does, we've talked about this many times, so I don't think I'm dropping him in it. But Matthew, the good Christian boy, was having a bit of a journey away from God at that time, and he went to Parachute to find the ladies, to find the girls. So the friend who took me to Parachute ditched me. And I was on my own. I had just had surgery, and I was feeling physically the best I'd ever felt. And I remember sitting there, but still feeling like something was missing. And the main speaker was speaking. I was sitting in this field in the middle of nowhere, not knowing the other people in the field. And the topic that he was speaking on was the difference between just believing in something and following something and becoming a disciple. It's not enough to just know who God is or that God is there, but his challenge was, if you know it and you believe it, you would follow it. You would be a disciple. You would do what the Bible says. And I remember sitting there and just feeling this tremendous sense of peace and like really convicted by the message, American man. And I kind of just sat there and was processing that on my own. I didn't know the youth group I had gone with. Matthew and his family, the only Christians I knew, were going to be moving to Christchurch the very next week. So it was my last sort of like thing. And so as I was getting on the bus to go home, this man from Radio Rima, or I think it was Rima, yeah, gave me the Gospel of Luke. And the whole bus ride home, I just read the entire Gospel of Luke. And my prayer as I got home, because my family's not going to be able to show me what to do, the Christians that I know who could show me what to do are ditching me for Christchurch. We were in Wellington at the time. And I said to God, if you are real, show me what to do. So on Monday morning, when I got home, I went to the letterbox and there was a flyer for the local Anglican church. And so I went, okay, well, maybe I should go check out this church. And throughout the week, I kept going around and I walked to it. It was close enough to walk to, I'll be able to get there. And I walked around and I was scoping it out. And then one of the priests came out and asked me what I was doing. It was one of the churches that are open all the time and you can just go inside. And I explained and they said, you probably should come back on Sunday. I guess it looked like I was robbing the place. And so I did. I went on Sunday. I got involved. I met the youth leaders and the youth pastors. I really love seeing the people when you come early, putting up the chairs and stuff. I was done with school. I dropped out at school at that point, and because my health was bad again. And so I just hung out. I used to help set up chairs for youth group. I used to go and watch the band practice. And I wasn't yet fully committed to God and all of that stuff, but I just started hanging out with Christians. There was something different about this community of people and I wanted to be around them, and the care and the love that they gave me was pretty game-changing. So that's how I got to know God. And on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2003, I was feeling pretty miserable and lonely, wishing I had a girlfriend. I drove my car to the top of the hill and through tears I just said, God, okay, I'm all in, I'm yours. And then I got stuck in. I became the youth intern and became a youth worker. And have been doing youth work since I was 17. Cool. So that's kind of how I got to know God, and I'm still getting to know God, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. So finding freedom. One of the very first things that I needed to deal with was the death of my dad. It had been about 5 years. I was 17. He died when I was 13. And there was a real ache there with how things had ended. The last words I had given my dad were cheek, talk back. And I remember we had processed it as a family, but we were still grieving. We didn't have the framework and the understanding to do it and to know the Creator and God and stuff like that. So I remember Sam and Rosemary were the youth leaders at the time. And they helped me walk through it and go on that journey. And we went back to where Dad's ashes had been scattered. And they helped me. It was just my friend from church and the two leaders and myself. And we prayed. We sat on the hill where we scattered his ashes. We read scripture. And I felt this real burden, this just lift. This anxiousness and this anxiety lift. And there's been lots of moments like that, but that that freedom that comes from that, knowing that God is in control, that He's got me. I don't know where Dad was with God when he passed away, but I trust in God's love for him. I know that Dad will have to stand and be accountable for what he did and didn't do in his life. But God the Father filled a gap. And I found freedom in that. I also found freedom because through poor health, struggling with it all the time. Before going to work at Otamatea, I've only been there for 3 weeks. I was working as a youth worker down with Springboard and in the Dome Valley, and it was proving really tricky, the travel, 2 young kids, anemia, sore stomachs. It was not how I wanted my time to end, but I was just struggling with those days. And it's very frustrating, and there were people here. I've been prayed for my health. I've been prayed for the last 20 years for my health, and I haven't found freedom and healing from that. But I have found freedom walking alongside God. I don't know how people face these things without God. When I've been sitting in the hospital waiting for test results, God has been with me. When I've been struggling at work, there was times, having to hold my side just to stand upright. I'm not defined by my body, by my health. I'm a beloved child of God, and there's freedom in that. And then 2018, last one for finding freedom, hit. And 2018, believe it or not, would have been a worse year than the year Dad died for me. And out of respect for the people involved, I'm not going to go into the details, but if I pique your interest and you want to chat, I'm happy to have a chat. It'll probably cost you a coffee. But needless to say, it was a really tough year for me. I got really let down, I got betrayed, I got really hurt. I've been a youth worker my whole life, and before coming to CauseWay, I was actually the youth and young adults pastor full-time at my previous church for 16 years. I started at 22 and left at 37. And I had to stop working. I had to have countless meetings with the elders to work through what had happened. And I was on my own in my home, binge watching Marvel movies, very angry at God, but still talking to Him. A lot of non-Christian friends of mine at that time would say, "Where is your God now? He's let you down." But I didn't feel like God had let me down fully, and I trusted enough in what He had done all those years before and continues to do, that I hung in there. So there was 6 months where I would go to church, walk through the building, stand in the front so no one could see me, and just cry for the entire service. There was 6 months where all I could do was read that Bible verse and hang in there. God, it doesn't feel like it right now, but I know that your love for me is wide and deep and long, and I've been really let down. God's also amazing in the way that He uses the church, His body, to mobilize. So I was incredibly supported by the pastor, my boss, and the elders. They wrapped around me. They put strategies in place so that my work could happen without me. But then there were several men in the church that had gone through what I had gone through. And in turns, once a week, they would come and meet with me and take me for coffee and just sit. Sometimes they let me cry. Sometimes we talked about sport. And when I had the courage to talk about what had happened, they let me talk about what had happened. And slowly in time, the pain subsided, and I was able to move on and get back into things. Those are 3 occasions where I was walking through the storm, as we sung about, and God, I found freedom in God. And I was able to return back to what was my purpose. And so discovering purpose, like I said, at 17, I came to faith. And I started hanging out like a bad smell in the church. They couldn't get rid of me. I just volunteered, did any job that I could. And eventually one of my friends was the youth intern, and he left to go on a discipleship training course in England, and they offered me the youth internship. So I started to help with the youth group. I would set up the room, I would do a lot of admin work, run camps. But I was very fortunate to have a youth pastor that was a good worship leader, so other churches would invite him to travel around the lower North Island. And very early on he said, "Brad, come with me." And so, believe it or not, in my year 11 speeches, I would stand up in front of the class and shake so violently that I had to drop my cue cards and hold my leg. That was kind of embarrassing in front of 30 other boys. But Sam, the youth leader, took me along and he said, "Brad, just come. You've got an amazing story. Come and share it." So we would go to house churches, we would go to other churches, and he would have me share for 5 minutes. And through that, I got more and more confident at sharing. Through that, I realized that I actually really love sharing my faith with other young people in particular. And so I trained and got a diploma in youth work. I stopped working for the church actually, and I went and started running the local drop-in centre for our suburb. And I would run after school every week, working with the kids that had nowhere else to go, the kids from tough backgrounds. Didn't always get to share my faith, but if I was asked, I did. We'd tell them about going to church, but a lot of my work was getting young men to own up that they had stolen from Blockbuster. And if you're too young to know what Blockbuster is, it's a DVD store, and one young man had been going in and prying open the DVDs. And so he came in to the youth centre in a panic, and we sat down and we talked through stuff, and he and I walked to the local police officer, and he came clean and saved himself a bit of trouble. Another young man had run away from home, and I was the only adult that he was visiting. And we had a shower, and I'd let him shower and stuff like that. After a while, I got my job at the Anchor, and ever since, I kind of figured that my purpose is to love God, to love others. And if I had to sum up my purpose, it would be for young people to know how much God loves them, how wide, how deep, how rich His love for them is. And it hasn't stopped. Ever since moving here, working in a youth work springboard, and even now at Otamatea High School. Walking in, working with 11 and 12-year-olds. I want to walk into that space, and I want to be present for Christ, praying for the staff, praying for the young people, and sharing my faith with them. Emily and I met each other after 2018. We've been married, how old's our son? We've been married since January 2021. She's a special lady. We met, we found out that we both like to rock climb, skateboard, do all these fun things, but we also found that we share a really similar ethic around God and what we want in life. And so we've both come together, and we reckon that together we can serve God much better than as individuals. And so our purpose now is to continue to love God, love each other, and to raise 2 young men that will be strong in the faith and serve and love others. And a really proud dad moment this morning was, and I'll read the text actually, is, so Zeke, our oldest, is sick. And Emily messaged me this. "You'll be pleased to know that you have a boy who loves church. I told him earlier that you'd gone to church when he asked where you were, and he immediately collapsed on the ground in tears, saying, 'I want to go to church.'" And so, we've been spending a lot of time upstairs. He absolutely loves it, and you should come and hang out upstairs with us too. Cool. So, yeah, discovered my purpose is to serve young people in whatever shape and form that takes, whether that's talking to one person immediately or whether that's doing it through paid work. Okay, making a difference. I think I've made a difference in the lives of many young people over 20 years, but I've only been able to make a difference because God has made a difference in my life. I can love because God first loved me. I can serve because God first served me. And this was my final university project. I brought it up on stage. You're actually the third group that I'm presenting it to. The first was my class. It goes that way. My class last year at Carey Baptist College. So I was doing a theology degree and it took me 12 years, very, very slowly. But I got my theology degree in this, instead of, they said you could write 3,000 words or do an artifact. I was like, I'm not writing 3,000 words. So I did some artwork on a skateboard and I did a year's worth of research about God's movement towards us, our movement towards God, and how that brings the fullness of life and makes a real difference. And then I did a spoken word, and I thought I would finish with a spoken word if you would indulge me. But just to explain it, I wrote the first half when I was 17 and I started listening to the worship band. I wrote the middle half about 10 years ago, and then I wrote the last half last year. And it goes from me, the young man, to me, the father, and how I want to make a difference in my son's lives and in the lives of others that I meet. And more than anything else, I have a friend who's a pastor in Christchurch, and he was sharing at a conference I was at about being a non-anxious presence in the world. Grant and I were driving to church this morning and talking about the ills of this world and are we concerned? Am I concerned about bringing up my boys with all that's going on and the stresses and stuff? But one of the biggest difference God makes in my life is that He allows me to be a non-anxious presence in this world. My security is found in God first and foremost. He colors my world and enriches it so amazingly that I don't need to be anxious. Do I come across trials? Yes. Am I concerned for my sons? Am I frustrated when I get prayed for my anemia to disappear and then I go home and my mum's telling me that I look like a ghost and it doesn't seem to work? Yes, the struggles and the trials of life are real and we live in a fallen and broken world, but God frames it differently and I can cling to Him and I can be a non-anxious presence. I work in Otametia High School with the junior syndicate and with the young people that are struggling the most, who are the most anxious because of what's going on in the world, at home, and with the cards that they've been dealt. And if nothing else, if I can be secure in myself and be a non-anxious presence, I can make a difference, and it invites conversation. So I actually got to perform this to a Year 7 class at Otametia School. They were doing slam poetry and they're doing a poetry cafe. And I said, I do poetry to the teacher. I can perform it. I said, it will be Christian in nature. It will tell my story. And she said, no, that's fine. So half a class was me giving my testimony and sharing this poem. And so I'm going to read it just because I don't have it fully memorized, and I'm going to blame baby brain, even though Emily says I can't claim baby brain. Okay. So this kind of sums it all up. What does the cross mean to a young man in his late teens? What did it achieve? If he didn't see it, how can he believe? 2,000 years later, what does he receive? But you saw gain where he saw loss. You took a bullet for him in the form of a cross. Your ultimate love paid the ultimate price, the blood of the Lamb, the perfect sacrifice. My God, why am I forsaken? One last breath and the earth was shaken. This was history in the making. This Messiah, he was not faking. Truly this man was the Son of God who shed his blood for the very people dragging him through the mud. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Strung up and hung up and nailed to the altar. Yet still his love, it would not falter. The young man now sees it. He hears it. He tastes it too. But how does he act and what must he do? Does he follow a script carved out through the ages? Walk in straight lines crafted by sages? Does he shout in the streets to warn the deaf, uttering truths until his last breath? Does he paint signs on billboards to aid the blind, fluorescent and bold so they light up the mind? No, he positions himself close to the one. He orbits around God's only Son, moving and dancing with the ruler of all, the one who can catch him and stop the free fall. Now his dad watches on, cheering from the bleachers, joined by a host of devoted teachers. They played their parts, they showed him the way. Some taught him to laugh, others taught him to pray. None tried to compete with the ruler of life. They were complete, living at his side. Demonstrating the patterns that drew them to Jesus, the lives they had lived in true exegesis. The young man's greatest desire is to worship the King. A life lived for Jesus is everything.